Alright, this is going to be a long one, so settle in. Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex and today I'm going to be bringing you my May wrap-up. So far for 2019, I have been averaging about 12 books a month, and that total fell a little bit in April. But in May, I was able to bring it back up and ended up finishing 12 books throughout the month. So I thought that first I would bring you guys a few of my reading stats. 7 of the books I read this month were either published this year or last year, and the other 5 are more backlist. My genres for the month were a little bit all over the place. I read 3 contemporaries, 2 fantasies, 4 historical fictions, 1 nonfiction, 1 mystery thriller, and 1 dystopian. 9 of my books were young adult and the other 3 were adult. And 10 of these books were written by female authors and 2 were written by male authors. Before I actually get into the wrap-up, I do want to mention really quickly one DNF that I had this month, and that was Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danler. This book follows a young girl, I believe she's around 22, and she moves to New York to become a waitress, and it follows her from there trying to fit in this new community and trying to stand up to the harsh life of being this new young up-and-coming professional in the city. She gets into drugs a little bit, yada yada. I personally DNF'd it around, I think, 22%. Listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook was fine. The book itself was fine. There was really nothing wrong with it in and of itself. It just wasn't a story that I found that I was particularly interested in. I will say that the writing style was incredibly atmospheric. Stephanie Danler did an incredible job of really putting you in that space. She does a very, very good job of describing the food and the smells and the tastes and everything that you would experience in a New York City kitchen. And it almost had kind of like a dreamlike quality to it, which I thought was really interesting. But for me, I'm just trying to be more strict on myself and actually make myself DNF books when I don't really care about the story. And this was one of those cases. So if it sounds like something that you're interested in, I would definitely say go for it. Just personally wasn't for me. So with that out of the way, we'll now get into the wrap up of the 12 books that I read in May. I will list all 12 of these books in the description box down below, and I will leave the timestamps where I start talking about them. So if you want to jump to one specific book, all of that information will be down in the description for you guys. But this one's going to be kind of lengthy. I have 12 different books to discuss. So grab a snack, grab a drink, settle in, and without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I finished in the month of May was The Inexplicable Logic of My Life by Benjamin Alexandre. This story is kind of a slice of life novel about a young boy named Sal. Sal is a Mexican-American teenager who has been adopted by a gay father, and it basically just follows a little piece of his life from there. This is a very character-driven story. There are specific plot points that happen, but not one triggering event that takes the story forward. It just mainly follows Sal dealing with quite a lot of bullying and different perceptions of him and his family. We get to hear a lot from him and his best friends. There are quite a lot of trigger warnings in this, namely grief. There is a lot of grief that happens in this novel. So if that's something that's going to be touchy for you, I might wait until you're in a different headspace. But overall, this story, while it is very quiet and character driven, it's really heartwarming. It can be heartbreaking at times, but like I said, it's just a slice of life novel that I feel like everybody can gain something from. There is quite a lot of diversity in this book. Like I said, Sal, our main character, is adopted, and he is Mexican-American, and his father is gay. So those are some of the diverse elements that play into this book, and I thought that they were all done very, very well. Benjamin Alexandre just is a master storyteller. He can just really bring you in and make you connect with these characters. Even if you think you don't have anything in common with them, he will change your mind about that. So if it sounds like something you're interested in, it is a really quick read. It's, like I said, heartwarming and heartbreaking. So it has both elements there, a really nice balance. I just really appreciated what this book did. Is it the most memorable thing I've ever read? No, it's not, but I really enjoyed my time reading it, and I think I'm better for it. So overall, I did really enjoy this one, and I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5. The next book I read in May was one of in my top 2 favorites that I read in the month, and that was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book follows our main character, Emily, who is a teen mom that loves cooking. We follow Emily as she is raising her young daughter and trying to survive in school, get along with her daughter's father, help her abuela survive, and raise her and her daughter. And in the book, her high school starts offering a culinary class. She enrolls in this class and is given the opportunity to go on an excursion to Spain. So we get to follow Emily as she is trying to make this possible for herself. I can't explain to you how much I adored this novel. Again, this novel is incredibly atmospheric. Elizabeth Acevedo is an incredible writer. She, as you probably know, is the author of The Poet X, which was a book written in verse. She has that same lyrical quality to this novel, even though it is a novel written out in prose. I do recommend, if you can, listen to the audiobook of this because the author actually reads it and she does a phenomenal job. One thing that I really appreciated about this novel is Emily in and of herself as a character. I feel like she was so well-rounded, so well done, and she has a lot on her plate. She's trying to deal with issues with her own father. She's trying to raise a daughter of her own. She's trying to figure out high school and college and dealing with her baby's father. She has a love interest throughout the story. She's trying to make things happen for herself. And she doesn't have it all figured out, which is something that I really appreciated. Even though Emily is a teen mom and I am a 24-year-old mom, I still felt like I related with her so much. Some of the issues that she talks about throughout motherhood and the way that your body changes and your mindset changes and just your life in general after you have a child, I feel like it just connected with me in a way that I haven't yet experienced in another novel. This story is just beautifully told. The atmosphere is so rich. Every single character, even the side characters, are so well developed, and you see so much growth in every single one of them throughout the story. They have their issues, they have their hard times, and they have their good times, and you just relate to every single character in this story. I cannot stop gushing about it. I don't own this one yet, but this is definitely one that's going to be going on my shelves. It's phenomenal. Please, if you haven't picked it up, go and get it. Obviously, I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read in the month of May is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wine. This is a World War II historical fiction novel that follows our main character whose code name is Verity. And she is a British spy pilot whose plane crashed in Nazi-occupied France. And she has now been detained by the Germans. This story is her revealing her mission. They basically told her either you can reveal your mission or you'll be killed. So this is her revealing her mission. And throughout the story, you learn the journey of Verity and her best friend Maddie, who is also a pilot, and what they have gone through so far in the war. I was excited for this one going in, but I felt, especially in the beginning, that I couldn't really connect with the characters. And I think part of it was the way that the story is told. Because on paper, she says, okay, I'm writing this out for you because you're telling me that I have to. Here's what happened, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now you're torturing me. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now this and that. And she's going back and forth. And it really took me out of what was supposed to be the main story. I felt the parts that were more interesting were the parts where she is in her real time and she says, oh, I can't write anymore because I'm almost out of paper. Or, oh, you told me so-and-so last night, blah, blah, blah. Those parts of her actually being detained were more interesting to me than the actual story itself was. And if you've read this book, then you know that it's kind of split into 2 different sections. I'm not going to say exactly what happens in each section in case you haven't read it because it is a little bit of a spoiler in my opinion, but I felt much more connected to the second half than I did to the first half. And I just think that the writing style is a lot of that. I went into this book a little bit blind, and I kind of wish that I would have had a little more information going in on the front end. So if you're iffy about this book, I would recommend going to Goodreads and reading the full synopsis before you jump in, because I think that I would have enjoyed it more had I gone in more prepared. So overall, this one was just kind of meh for me, middle of the road, and I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished in May is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy. This one took me forever to read, but I finally got through it. You probably already know what this one is about if you have been around for a while, but it follows our main character Feyre, who is out hunting one day and accidentally kills a fairy, which is against the law. So she, instead of being killed, her life is spared, but she has to go and live in the fairy realm. This story is loosely inspired by Beauty and the Beast, and I really enjoyed the way that that retelling aspect played out. It was subtle enough that it didn't feel like it overtook the whole story, and I couldn't tell where it was going, thinking back like, oh, in Beauty and the Beast this happened, so this has to be what happens in this story. I didn't feel that at all, but at times you just got little nuggets of things that really reminded you of the Beauty and the Beast story, which I really enjoyed. I felt like it was handled with care, but it was definitely its own thing. I'm not gonna say too much about this because this is the first in a trilogy. There's more to come. Obviously, this isn't the full story. It does have its own arc that the story follows, but there's definitely enough open-ended to make you want to continue the series. And I did really enjoy the twist at the end of this, and I'm definitely going to be pushing forward. I love Sarah J. Maas. I'm excited to see what else she does with the series and just in the future in general. So overall, I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5. The next book I read in May is Before I Let Go by Marika Nijkamp. This book follows our main character, Corey, who is originally from Alaska and is now living in the contiguous US, but she returns to Alaska when she finds out that her best friend, Kyra, has died. Corey is initially told that Kyra died by suicide, but when she returns to Alaska, to this very small town that she hasn't been a part of for a while, things are not as she remembers them, and she starts to question the real story behind Kyra's death. There is representation in this book for mental illness, as well as a character that is LGBT. I cannot speak to that representation personally, but I liked the way that it was portrayed. Obviously, if you want to know a little bit more, dig deeper and see what that representation is, and I would recommend finding some Own Voices reviewers if you're interested in that aspect. But overall, I liked the way that it was played into the story, and I liked the way that it was handled. I felt like the characters interacting with these elements handled it very well. The thing that brought this book down the most for me was the writing style. This author also wrote a novel called This Is How It Ends, which I absolutely adored, and I did not have this problem with that one. But in Before I Let Go, I just felt like the writing style did not flow with me. And a lot of the reason of that is that the dialogue just felt cheesy. If I were picturing a scene in my head, I could not actually hear a character saying the words that were written on the page. It just sounded so stilted, and I just couldn't, it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't sound like the way that teenagers talk to each other, or even adults talk to each other in those scenes. Just, I couldn't get behind the dialogue, and it really took me out because I was just thinking, that's not the way people talk. That was half of me in this book, was thinking, that's not how people would say that. That's not how that would happen. So that really took me out of it, and just the writing style overall just personally didn't gel with me. So overall, this was an okay book. It was nothing that I think I'm ever going to return to, but if it sounds like something you're interested in, I might give it 100 pages or so and just see if it's for you. Not the best thing I've ever read, not the worst thing I've ever read. So overall, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi. This book follows our main character, Shireen, as she is living in post-9/11 America, and she is a Muslim teenager. So she is dealing with a lot of racial profiling and violence and bullying because of her identity. She has obviously nothing to do with 9/11, but she kind of gets lumped into that because of the way that she looks. So it's her really dealing with that. She does have a love interest in this book named Ocean, and Shireen likes to break dance. So I thought that was an interesting element added into the story. This book draws a lot from Tahereh Mafi's own experiences living in 2002, and our main character comes from a culture that I know little to nothing about, and I really enjoyed the way that this revealed things about that culture. It didn't feel like it was explicitly trying to teach readers. Obviously, there are parts in this where it mentions things briefly and kind of subtly encourages you as a reader to look further into it. But there are other parts where, you know, Shireen might be explaining things to another character, things about her culture, so you get to learn along with them. I thought that that balance was done really well. Obviously, I thought the love interest in this was adorable. I will say, I think that the balance between the love interest and the harder hitting issues of this novel was done really well. And it wasn't just because she fell in love and now everything is fine. That definitely didn't happen, and I really appreciated that. And another thing I loved about this book was her hobby of breakdancing. That is not something that I've ever seen in another novel, and I know again that draws from Tahereh Mafi's real life, and it was so interesting to see that play out in here, and it was weaved through beautifully. I think overall this is just a really compelling and a really important story. I flew through this one. It is pretty short. I think it's like right at 300 pages, so it's not going to take you long to read it, but I definitely feel like it's something that everyone should give a shot. And I gave it a 5 out of 5. The next book I read in May was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I actually listened to this one on audiobook. This book follows 17-year-old Audrey Rose living in the time of Jack the Ripper. By day, she is a prim and proper young lady that behaves how a lady is supposed to behave, but at night she is with her uncle learning about dead bodies and kind of shying away from her typical lady stature. And she and her uncle actually get involved with the Jack the Ripper case, trying to figure out who this serial killer is. I expected that I would like this, but I didn't think I would like it quite as much as I did. I felt like Audrey Rose was really well balanced. You can tell she's kind of just a badass throughout the whole story, and she's obviously really interested in science and learning about the human body and being in the morgue with her uncle, but she also does really enjoy just being a girl and getting new dresses and going shopping and meeting a boy. So she has a really nice balance there in a time when girls really they weren't allowed to have a balance. The love interest in this is kind of a hate to love trope, and I thought it was done beautifully. I love that trope, and this one definitely won me over. And the twists and turns throughout this book, the mystery of them trying to figure out who Jack the Ripper was, again, I think it was done beautifully. We get to the end of the book, and I still didn't have any clue what was going to happen, so that was done really well. Overall, this is a great start to the series. I think that it's 3 or 4 books long. I'm not sure at this point, but I'll definitely be continuing on. I ended up giving Stalking Jack the Ripper a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Things My Son Needs to Know About the World by Frederick Bachman. This is Frederick Bachman's newest release, and it is a non-fiction, kind of a collection of short stories that Frederick Bachman has written to his infant son. I really liked the balance in this between heartwarming moments and just funny anecdotes. I do feel like, obviously, if you are a parent, that you will gain a little bit more from this than you would otherwise, but if you are a fan of Frederick Bachman, I recommend you go ahead and pick this up anyway. It's super short. It's less than 200 pages, or if you listen to the audiobook, I think it's about 3 hours, maybe even less. So I've read this one in a day. You can so just fly through it. Again, if you like Frederick Bachman, give this one a read. It gives you an insight into his life. It's just a beautiful collection of stories. This is one that I could see myself returning to, mainly just because it's so short and it's just a quick, fun read, something to lift you up. Again, if you're a parent, I would definitely recommend this one, especially if you have young children. It really brings to light some of the struggles of parenting that we might not want to discuss, but it makes you feel like you're not alone in that regard. So I really just highly enjoyed it overall, all across the board, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Next in May, I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and this is the first novel in her Folk of the Air trilogy. This story follows our main character, Jude, who is a human girl, and when she was 7 years old, her parents were murdered, and their murderer brought her to the land of fairy to be raised with her sisters. We then follow Jude when she is 17, and she is trying to win her way into the fairy court. This is another case of I expected to enjoy this book, but I didn't know just how much I would enjoy it. This is the first book I've ever read by Holly Black as a solo author, and I really enjoyed her writing style and the way that she built this world. I thought it was expertly done. I did feel like in the beginning it was a little bit info dumpy and a little bit slow to develop the characters and develop the world, but once you got into about a third or halfway in, that's when the action really started to pick up and it became a lot more interesting for me. Overall, there is a ton of action, plot twist, political intrigue. Pretty much if you are a fantasy fan and you haven't given this one a shot yet, I would definitely say go for it. Even if you don't think you like fairies, go for this one because I think you'll like it. This one, it was actually on my booktube challenge. If you've seen that video of mine, this is one that was highly recommended by some of my favorite booktubers from last year. Picked up, read it, loved it. I understand what all the hype is about now. I will definitely be continuing with this series, and I gave The Cruel Prince a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Another read from my booktuber list was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This one is so widely proclaimed, and I definitely understand why. This book is another World War II historical fiction novel that follows 2 sisters that are living in Nazi-occupied France. I feel like a lot of the time when we read World War II historical fiction, we follow things that are happening on the front lines. We're following the action of the fight, people in the camps or fighting right on the front lines. But this story follows these 2 sisters who are really just trying to survive. I don't feel like we hear a whole lot about the women in World War II, and one of our sisters is trying to carry on the home front and do her part, and another sister is in part of an underground kind of resistance movement, and their stories are so rich and so impactful, and told me about a whole other side of the war that I really hadn't considered that much. And the way that these stories are told is just masterpiece. It was just phenomenally done. I can 100% understand why so many people have been impacted by this story. Again, this one was one for me that it took me a little bit in the beginning to get into it, but once I was hooked and I couldn't put it down. This novel is so atmospheric in a way. It's kind of hard for me to describe, but when Kristen Hanna is telling elements of this story, just things that people are going through in their daily lives, and you're thinking, oh yeah, these people went through this and this and this. Why didn't I think about that? And it's so well told, all the little details and the way that the story just progresses throughout the war. It's just beautifully done. I really can't recommend it enough. Whether or not you read a lot of historical fiction, this is one that you should definitely pick up. I think that it provides a new perspective on the war that everybody needs to experience. So if you don't get into it at first, just keep pushing through. It took me a little bit, but I promise that it is definitely worth the wait. And obviously I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, we have 2 more. We're gonna do it. Next on my list was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my other favorite book of the month so far, and arguably one of my favorite books of the year. This novel is told in an interview-style format of a fictional 1970s rock band called Daisy Jones and the Six. We follow all of the characters, all of the members of the band as they are telling kind of their beginnings and their rise to fame and why they broke up. I will say if you can listen to this one on audiobook, 100% do it that way. It is narrated with a full cast and all of the actors are so talented. It was a production and you should definitely try to consume it in that format if you can. This is the first time in my entire life that I have wanted to reread a book as soon as I finished it. I'm not a big rereader. I am trying to get better about it, but I just don't reread books that often. And this is one that I was just aching. I didn't want to let it go. I wanted to bring myself back into that world. And these characters are just so dynamic and you really feel for them. The thing that I really appreciated about this was that even though these characters are rock stars, they are so relatable. You would think that in that world, you know, we're almost 50 years removed from the time that this novel was taking place. So you would think that they wouldn't be that relatable. They are talking about drugs and sex and rock and roll, and that might not be the thing that you think you can relate to, but these characters have their own personal issues that you really find that you're rooting for them and you're aching for them. This book almost brought me to tears several times because I was just so impacted by these character stories and the way that they were all weaved together. The atmosphere, just everything about this book came together so beautifully. I already had high expectations of this one after I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I've been hearing major buzz about this one, and I'm so happy to say that it even exceeded my expectations, which were already really high. A lot of people said with Evelyn Hugo that it's hard to believe that Evelyn Hugo is not real, and I felt this way about Daisy Jones and the Six, and I've heard a lot of other people say the same thing. They talk about specifically several songs that they wrote and other people that they knew and blah, 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 and it is really hard to gather that this isn't real. Like, I need this album, I need these soundtracks, I need to see this album cover, I need to know more about these people, and I can't believe that they're not real. It really feels genuinely like nonfiction, but it's so compelling like a fiction story. It's just really the perfect balance. As of the time I'm filming this, I just finished this book yesterday, so my thoughts are still a little bit incoherent, but like I said, I absolutely adored this one. If you are even the little bitty teeny tiniest bit interested in this book or Taylor Jenkins Reid or the 70s or anything, just please go pick it up. Try to get the audiobook because it's phenomenal, and you'll probably see this one again in another wrap up because it wouldn't surprise me if I went back and read it again, but obviously I gave this one a 5 out of 5. And the last book that I read in the month of May was Defy Me by Tahira Mafi. This is the 5th book in the Shatter Me series, so obviously I can't give a whole lot of details as far as the plot because I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say the Shatter Me series was originally a trilogy, and then an additional 3 books were added on to the end. So this book is the second book in that second trilogy. And as such, I did feel like it suffered from a little bit of a sophomore slump. The first half of the book To me, a lot of it was kind of stagnant. You don't get a whole lot of action. You get quite a few flashbacks and trying to fill in the blanks of things that happened in the aftermath of the 4th book and the plot twist at the end of the 4th book. You get to learn a little bit more about that. And then in the second half, that's when the action really picks up, and that's when it really hooked me. I will say that it did read really fast. I flew through this one, which usually I don't do with fantasy and dystopian books. Even in the parts that I felt were a little bit slower, the writing style was so lyrical and so well done. It moved the story along really nicely. But I will say, since not a whole lot was happening and I kind of found myself like waiting for action to happen, I was going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, but I ended up bumping my rating up to a 4 once we got to the end because I did really enjoy the way that it wrapped up. So overall, I was satisfied. I was a little bit disappointed, but overall, it was good. I'm excited to see where the story goes. This series is going to be wrapping up at the very beginning of 2020, so we'll see what happens. I'm excited. But like I said, overall, I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5. And that is all 12 books that I read in the month of May. I did want to go ahead and throw in one that I'm in the middle of. Right now, I am halfway through Aurora Rising by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I am like right at halfway. Wasn't able to finish this one before the month is out, so you will be hearing more about it in my June wrap up, but just note that I'm loving this one so far. That is it for my May wrap up. Thank you so much if you have made it through this whole probably incoherent spiel of all the books that I read in May. If you have read any of these, or if you were excited to get them on your TBR, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I would love to chat with you guys. So until next time, bye!